PianoDisc Calibrate app is a free iOS app that lets you wirelessly set up and configure your PianoDisc SilentDrive HD2. The app is available from the iTunes Store. Now, after your system is installed, of course it's important to set it up and fine-tune it so you get the best possible performance out of your piano. However, it's also important to remember to periodically recalibrate your system, maybe at the next tuning, because piano actions change over time and occasionally need recalibration. So let me show you how it works. The great thing about this app is that if you connect wirelessly with MIDI, you can do it from the comfort of your couch. You don't need to crawl under the piano or be tethered with wires. So let's get started. First, download the PD Calibrate app from iTunes. Now, touch the app to begin. You'll notice in the upper right-hand corner there's a small Bluetooth icon. Click that, and we're going to connect to PD SilentDrive BT MIDI. Great, we're connected. You'll notice that the indicator light in the upper right-hand corner turns green. That means we have a connection via MIDI to the SilentDrive HD2. Now, when you touch SilentDrive, you'll see a warning screen pop up. That's just to remind you that this app is for certified and trained piano disc technicians. If you're not sure what you're doing, make sure to read the instructions and understand what the parameters do before making any adjustments. Okay, let's get going. Now, when we get into the app, you'll see all of the parameters and what values they're set to. This is great because in the past it was difficult to know what settings you were using, and so seeing the actual exact settings is a big advantage in getting the most out of your piano disc system. Let's start with the key hold force. Now, the key hold force is designed to apply just enough power to the key solenoids to hold the keys down. And we don't want too much power. Too much power can result in the solenoids running warm and can affect performance. We also don't want too little power or the keys won't play correctly. So let's press the test button and see where we're at. Now, you'll notice I lifted the tip of each key and the keys didn't return to a fully pressed position. That's not exactly what we're looking for. We're not looking for them to slam back down to a fully depressed position, but we are looking for them to go back down by themselves gently. So let's adjust the key hold force and try again. There, that's perfect. Now, if every key doesn't fully return to its fully pressed position, that's also okay. Now, the next parameter is power offset. And what this does is raises or lowers the power applied to the key solenoids. It applies across the keyboard, so if you raise it a little bit, all of the keys will play with a little bit more force. If you lower it, they all play a little bit lighter. Now, before we adjust the power offset, I think we need to take a look at the individual key level. And that's because our goal here is to get the individual key calibration to around 10 per key. Now, the values you see may vary dramatically depending on the condition of your action. But ideally, you won't see values that are all at 0 or all in the 20s or 30s. You want everything to hover around 10. And so if we're not seeing that when we do the individual key calibration, we can go back and move the entire keyboard range up or down so that we get in the range we're looking for. Let's give it a try and see where we are. So as you're adjusting each individual key, the goal is to get the key to play properly, so you not only hear the note play, but that the key is checking properly and it's playing solidly. You don't want it to just barely be making a sound or to be making too loud of a noise. You want it to be playing at its lowest possible proper velocity. So in this case, the key we're working on is moving, but it's not making any sound. So we're going to increase the velocity to the key. Great, there we go. Now you're going to do this for every key on the keyboard and make sure that each key sounds good with its neighbor. For example, if one key is a little bit louder than the rest, you may need to raise its neighbors up a tiny bit to match, otherwise it may stick out. The key is you want the whole piano keyboard to sound uniform and consistent. Now, as you're adjusting these keys, pay attention to the values you're getting. For example, this note is in the 20s. That's really not what we want. We want it closer to 10. But this is the value that it plays correctly at. So what do? Well, we go back to power offset and we make an adjustment. Currently, our power offset is set to -1. We're going to bump that up a little bit to 1 in this case. Now, every piano is different, and you'll have to experiment a little bit to find the range that works for you. But let's try it again, this time with a power offset of 1. Now, notice that the value of 12, which before sounded perfect, is now a little bit loud. So we're going to have to turn down the velocity to this note. Now, you're going to want to continue your key calibration and calibrate all of the piano keys individually. Again, you're looking for the lowest possible velocity where they play correctly. And you want to pay attention to the big picture. The neighboring keys should sound about the same. You don't want one note standing out. And again, pay attention to the velocity levels. If they're all in the 20s, increase your power offset a little bit to give yourself a better range. And if they're all too low, decrease your power offset to give yourself a little more headroom. Now, once you're done calibrating all the individual notes, I recommend you go back to the beginning and listen to all the notes play one by one, all the way up from the bass to the treble. And in doing this, you're looking for consistency and that no notes are missing or playing incorrectly. Once you've done that and your velocities are all in the range of 5 to 15, then you're good to go. And again, if there's 1 or 2 stragglers that are 0 or a little bit higher, that's fine too. Next, we're going to be adjusting the pedal solenoid. And for this, we need a clear view of the dampers on the piano. Now, the first thing we set is the pedal strike force. And this defines how much power we give to the pedal solenoid when it first plays. After the strike force, there's a secondary hold force. And that's what holds the pedal solenoid in position. Now, we're going to be setting the strike force first, and so we don't want the hold force to interfere. We're going to set the hold force to 0 and then proceed to check the strike force. So let's do that. We'll set the hold force to 0, and we'll press the test button and see how the dampers lift. We're looking for the dampers to lift up and then fall right back down. Okay, so we're going to increase the pedal strike force. There, that looks just about right. However, to err on the side of caution, we're going to add 5 values because the piano does change over time and we want to make sure that we're not just riding the threshold for the proper value. So we're going to add 15 values. Great, and test again just to make sure it's still working the way we want. Great. The dampers are lifting properly. Now it's time to adjust the pedal hold force. Now this time what we're going to do is watch that the dampers lift up and then remain lifted. We don't want to see them sag back down or show any sign of falling until the pedal actually turns off. So let's make an adjustment and see where we are. We'll start with a value of 10. Okay, notice how when the hold force is set to 10, the dampers lift and they fall a little bit more slowly, but they're definitely not holding. So this isn't the proper value. Let's increase it. Okay, notice how this time the dampers lifted and they are trying to hold, but they still sag down slowly. That's not what we want. So we still need a little bit more power. Okay, that's what we want. The dampers lift and they hold, and then they fall down again. Now, in this case, just like with pedal strike, we're going to add 15 levels just to err on the side of caution. Now let's test it again and make sure we're still where we want to be. Perfect. Now, if the pedal strike and hold forces are set too high, the pedal will still work and it will still play, but there'll be more pedal noise, and that's really not ideal for the optimal system performance. Let's take a look at the pedal drop time. Now, this is the time that it takes for the pedal solenoid to return to rest. If you actuate the pedal solenoid too quickly, it may not actually have the desired effect on the dampers, and notes may not be muted. So let's take a listen and see where we are. Now, in this case, we hear a chord play and the notes are sustained. Unfortunately, that's not what we want, because this isn't just sending one pedal message, it's sending two. It's turning the pedal on and then immediately turning it back off. But because the off message happened too quickly, that was missed. So we're going to increase the pedal drop time until we hear the chord play and then is immediately dampened. So let's hear how that sounds. We're getting close. There, that's what we want to hear. The pedal has enough time to work both times, and you hear the chord dampened. That's what we want. Once you've set your pedal drop time, it's time to move on to the advanced settings on the next screen. Now that we're in the advanced settings, we're going to start with a minimum note duration. And this is pretty similar to the pedal drop time we just set. Each key solenoid also needs a slight amount of time to return to rest, and so we need to make sure that we're giving it enough time to play properly. Now, in this case, we have a test button that will play all the keys in the piano one time through. As you're playing, you want to see each note play briefly and then turn off. If you have too many notes that don't play, you may need to increase the minimum note duration. If your minimum note duration is set too low, low volume playback may result in more dropped notes. And if it's too high, trills and fast note repeats may be missed or sound sloppy. So it's important to have this set at a value that's appropriate for both low volume playback and fast key repetition. We find that a value of 40 works in most conditions, and so we'll leave it at that for now. But let me press the test button so you can see how it works. There, that's what we want to see. The notes are all playing quickly and quietly, and the value seems to be set in the proper position. Let's move on to springless solenoids. Now, this parameter is really for legacy piano disc systems that were manufactured over 10 years ago. Many years ago, piano disc manufactured solenoids that had internal springs. If the piano disc system that you're installing is a modern system, there's no need to turn off springless solenoids. And in most cases, we'll just keep this turned on. Next, we'll talk about note release control. Now, there's three different types of note release control, or NRC. The first is off, and this is how the piano disc system comes by default. We find it's best for performance. However, if you notice that your keys are making noise, especially at low volume playback, it may be possible to reduce some of that noise with NRC. And what it does is it allows the keys to return to rest more slowly. So instead of just releasing the power to the solenoid, the key instead gradually moves up instead of an abrupt, quick motion. Now, with most modern piano actions and keyboard setups, this isn't really a concern. But if you have a piano that's making a lot of noise, you can try NRC and see if it solves your problem. NRC can have an effect on certain musical passages, and the SilentDrive is smart enough to turn it off when it sees fast notes and trills coming. However, there are some cases where NRC does affect performance, and so if you don't need to have it on, we recommend you leaving it off. Normal NRC affects all keys equally. Regardless of what music you're playing or what note release velocities are sent, the notes all return to rest a little bit more slowly than normal. That's normal NRC. Now, there's a third mode of NRC, and this is sort of an intelligent NRC. If you're using ProRecord or ProScan to record your own pieces, the ProRecord and ProScan send a note release velocity to the SilentDrive, and that velocity can give the SilentDrive an idea how fast the key is returning to its rest position. In other words, if you're playing a legato passage and have your fingers on the keys and are releasing slowly, the ProRecord and ProScan can sense that and try to mimic that in the solenoid. So when you're playing a quick staccato passage, the individual NRC has no effect whatsoever. But when you're playing a slow legato passage, then the NRC kicks in and releases those particular keys a little bit more slowly than the rest. This is an example of playback when note release control is turned off. Now, this is an example with normal note release control turned on. Notice how all the keys in the keyboard play normally, but lift a little bit more slowly. Now, remember, individual note release control affects the keyboard on a note-by-note basis. So notes that were released slowly release more slowly, and notes that were released quickly are quickly released by the solenoid. I hope this has explained NRC, and if you have any doubt as to what setting to choose, we recommend the default position of off. The next parameter is pedal release control. Similar to note release control, pedal release control will slow the fall of the dampers, and typically is left off, or a value of 0. If your dampers are making noise and it's not practical to re-regulate your piano, then you can experiment with the 4 various pedal release control parameters and see if you find one that works with your piano. So let me show you how that works. We'll start with a value of 18 and press the test button. Now, in this case, the dampers were still a little bit noisy, so I'm going to adjust it to 12. Wow, this time the dampers were completely silent. Pedal release control is affected by the damper height, and so there's no easy way to predict what value will work for your piano. There's 4 different parameters, not a lot, so you might as well try them and see which one works best. But again, if you can, leave that function off at 0. It's a great tool, though, if you run into a damper noise problem that's not easily addressed any other way. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the firmware update feature in the PD Calibrate app. It's important to keep your SilentDrive firmware up to date so that you're sure you have the latest performance enhancements and features. Every version of PD Calibrate comes with the most recent versions of the firmware for the SilentDrive system. So if you touch the version number, you'll see the versions that are available. Now, typically, we recommend going with the latest version, which is 15.1 in this case. To send a new version of firmware to the SilentDrive, simply select the version you want to send and press the send button. Then observe the LEDs on the SilentDrive as they cycle. When the process is all done, the indicator will show 100% and the lights will stop blinking. If you're using the SilentDrive HD2 and the built-in Bluetooth MIDI, you can do this process wirelessly. Now, if you're using a non-PianoDisc wireless MIDI adapter, it may be better instead to use a wired interface to your iPad. And that's because not all wireless MIDI interfaces are compatible with the PianoDisc download protocol. But again, if you're using the SilentDrive HD2, the wireless Bluetooth MIDI connection is no problem. after you're done calibrating the SilentDrive system, we recommend that you save your settings. That allows you to easily return to known parameters if anything changes in the system later. Maybe next time you go to a customer's house and do a tuning, you'll notice that some things have been changed, and you can easily reload your baseline. Then, after fine-tuning the settings, you can save them again, and that way you'll have a reference of all of your customers' calibration. Let's click Save at the top of the screen and type a name. Simply press Save, and all the parameters you just set up will be saved in your iPad. If you ever want to reload settings, for example, you need to swap out a CPU, you can first save the settings, then touch Load to load a previous version of your settings. After touching Load, you'll receive a dialog that asks if you want to replace the existing settings. Simply touch Yes, and the system will automatically be loaded with your saved settings. Now, once you've calibrated the system and saved your settings, don't forget about recalibrating every so often. We recommend that the system be recalibrated at each tuning. This allows you to adjust the system performance for the wear that the action and keyboard have experienced over time. Usually, those adjustments are minor and will help the system play to its fullest potential. I hope this video has been helpful and you've learned how to better optimize your PianoDisc system. Of course, if you do have any questions or need any help, our PianoDisc tech support team is ready to help. So give us a call or visit our website at pianodisc.com.